Like that feeling when you leave on the last day of school. I don't know what kind of school any of you went to, but if we did this on our last day of school, we would have been held. Summer would have had to wait another 30 minutes to clean up. This is Summer. Spoiler alert. While I might be giving you my opinion on the film, that's no substitute for watching it for yourself. Links to the film are in the description. As Jamie continues to explain the feeling she gets when she thinks about Summer, we see her make her way to the local hospital where she meets up with her parents Ned and Shira as they sit with her grandmother. As Shira leaves Jamie to go get a salad, Jamie asks what she's supposed to do if her grandmother dies on her while she's gone, but she ends up just narrating to us that this is the Summer that she messes up. Soon her grandmother actually wakes up and turns to her as Jamie leans in closer to hear something her grandmother has to tell her. Her grandmother lets her know that she secretly baptized her when she was a baby without her mother knowing. Who's a Jew? That has to be one of the weirdest deathbed confessions ever, but it gets better. Learn how to give a good __. I had to put that in there. Me telling you what grandma says there wouldn't have given it any justice. I told you this was the weirdest deathbed confessions. Imagine that being grandma's last words on earth. Soon Shira shows back up and Jamie decides not to tell her anything until they get to the car. Even then she only tells her about the baptism part. When Jamie has a flashback to school, she ends up finding herself traveling down a dark path of sexual exploration. She doesn't really get the big idea about sex, but her grandmother's final words to her just hit a nerve. That night she gets a text about some friends playing beer pong, but the family ends up getting a call from the hospital after finding out that grandma just wants the family gathered to confess things. Jamie starts to wish that her grandmother had been dying instead. Her grandmother really gives her family a what for, and she finishes it by telling Ned that his father wasn't actually his father. After the rest of the family comes back in and yells at each other about the kind of woman grandma was to keep this info, she simply smiles and dies just like that. It's really actually the biggest foo but I still love you moment ever. Of course Jamie leaves the room to go meet her friend Marge, and we see that he's been a really good friend for her to open up out of her shell after finding out that her grandmother died. Marge immediately hugs her and there's some sort of tension between the two friends, something like a crush being realized. He ends up giving her a beer and the two of them relax and hang out in his garage. Just as he gets the courage to ask if she wants to go inside, Jaime's father calls and she decides to get a ride from Marge back to her house. As the two of them ride on his bike, Jamie seems to have her first moment of peace and freedom. Once she gets home, she finds Shira drinking and dancing in the dining room, and she finds out that Ned decided to leave them to go find his real dad. After hearing this, Jamie heads to her room to try and call him, but all she gets is the voicemail. The next day Jamie heads to the church that they're going to be having the service for her grandmother, and she's surprised by Luke. Is Luke an intern priest? When did the Catholic Church start using young boys to lure in women to the church? Jaime's immediately caught up in Luke, but he's very into his work. He almost seems completely oblivious to anything sexual, and he's all about God, which is great for a priest in training. But for this story Jamie really picked a hard one. The two of them end up going for a walk through nature, and Jamie already knows that he's going to be a special person in her life. Later Jamie meets up with the family while they try to shop for coffins, and she decides that this is a great time to tell her Jewish mother that she wants to go to Catholic Mass. While the two of them are arguing, Jaime's Aunt Hope notices that her son and her keys are missing. After realizing the gravity of the situation, they rush outside to find the truck rolling backwards down the driveway, and Jamie hops in the passenger door to pull the emergency brake. After this, her mother decides that it's okay for her to try out church, and that night Jamie gets lost in one of her favorite books. It's Harry Potter, and if you ever wanted to see a funny notion that shows a wand being the representation of the male member without watching a porn parody, this is the movie for you. They're in robes and the wand lights up. I felt odd while watching this, and I don't say that lightly. Jamie decides to actually put some effort into her makeup and hair before going to church, and once there she realizes that she has no idea what she's doing. She misses all of the cues for repeating the priest, and she even fiddles on her phone before the prayer. After hearing that Luke's to be ordained soon and follow God for the rest of his days, Jamie realizes that this was a futile venture, and she leaves to get a ride from her friend Emily. Emily's the only person that Jamie tells about the __ comment from her grandmother, and we see why Emily's all about going fast and hard with men, and her vast knowledge and wisdom is sought after by most of the girls at school. After they get to one of March's parties, Emily tries to find out who Jamie is going to lose her mouth virginity to, but Jamie doesn't get the big deal. Who does Emily throw out as the perfect person to do it? March. Poor guy just wants to be with Jamie so badly that he'd probably go along with it and hope it turns into something more. The guy gives off that weird older brother vibe, the one that still wants to get with her even though he cares about her like that. It's hard to explain, but you know what I'm talking about. After a few rounds of beer pong, Jamie ends up planting a huge one on March, and he takes her to the pool to throw her in. Why is this his reaction? I don't know. When he picked her up, I immediately thought that he was going to the house, but no, the pool's the obvious answer. As Jamie starts to walk home, Luke ends up pulling up to her as he's on his way to her house to check on her. He tries to ask her why she's mad at him, but when she asks him what he thinks she is, he gets it spot on when he explains that the reason he ignored her was because she made him want to break the rules. Jaime's happy to know that the feeling of desires reciprocated. The two of them head to the lake to swim and relax, and Jamie asks him how he could want to be a priest. After explaining his troubled childhood, it only makes sense that he would love the idea of it, and she decides to ask him if he's allowed to drink. This girl's about to get Luke kicked out of Catholicism. He's been working towards this priesthood for so long, and he's about to lose it all over essentially nothing, yet nothing's even going on, and he's ready to risk it all. I mean, he's drinking a bottle of liquor with Jamie on a park playground while she gets ready to blow him. Then she describes him as a floppy sock puppet. Luckily for him, she thinks that she doesn't say that part out loud while Jamie dives right in. Hope and Shira are worried about Jamie since they haven't heard anything from her. Keep in mind that Jaime's phone got messed up when she got thrown into the pool. Meanwhile, Dylan snatches the keys to the car and runs outside while Jamie is going to town. Sirens go off as police head to a call, and she jumps right up when she asks Luke how it was. He simply refers to it as spectacular. When Luke goes to drop Jamie off, she finds that the police are at the house to look for Dylan. Her mother is furious with her and tries to send her to a room while they go to look for him, but Jamie hops on her bike and rides around town looking for Dylan. After a while, she finds that a cop's already found him with the car wrecked into a guardrail. He's fine, just a broken arm. I can't say the same for the cars. It rattles all the way back to their house. When they get home, they find March waiting on the doorstep with a new phone since he ruined the first one, but Sheer is holding to the idea of Jamie being grounded, so she takes the phone before sending March on his way. After Jamie goes up to her room, she ends up sleeping for 36 hours, and she worries that Luke thinks she's ignoring him. Then she calls __ a gateway drug to sex. Remember that, people, it might seem innocent at first, but it all leads to bigger, badder things, just like kissing leads to pregnancy. I'm just kidding. Do not rely on me for sex ed. While Jamie takes a shower, she can't help but think back to that night on the playground. When she gets to her computer, she talks to Emily about sneaking out that night, and she heads downstairs to discuss the terms of her grounding. What she finds is an old man in a wheelchair that tells her her mother is outside. When she goes out to talk to her mother, she finds out that Ned is back, and the old man inside is her actual grandfather, allegedly. Once they all sit down to eat together, Jamie realizes how mad she actually was at him for leaving. She imagines flipping the table and running out to freedom, but in reality she ends up sitting there in silence. It turns out that this potential real grandfather is actually very, very racist, and he calls Shira all sorts of things. Ned literally tries to equate this to cultural differences, and I'm pretty sure that's how wars have started. Now it's Shira's turn to leave. After Shiro walks out, Jamie takes this opportunity to ask Ned if she can go see Emily that evening. He agrees, and she goes into her mother's closet to get her new phone. When she meets up with Emily, Emily's just happy that she did the dirty with someone, but Mark shows up just as they talk about it. Jamie tries not to talk about it in front of him, but Emily has no filter. After hearing about it, March decides that he's got somewhere else to be, and Jamie gets a text from Luke. Jamie gets Emily to take her back home so she can get ready to meet up with Luke, and she goes to pick him up. Later that night, the two lovebirds go back to the lake where they sit on the dock and look out over the water. Once their eyes meet, it's all over. Remember __ are a gateway to this. Be careful. After they move to the grass, the two of them try to undress each other, but even that seems to be a little difficult. Then Jamie has Luke go down on her and he rocks her world for the next 8 seconds before putting a condom on. Then they get to it. While they're going at it, a truck ends up pulling up on them and lights come on to illuminate the field. Next thing you know, Cher is picking up Jamie from the police station. When they get home, Shira tells her that she's going to tell the actual priest what's been going on, and Jamie tries to tell her not to. After breaking down in her room, Jamie waits the entire next day for someone to punish her, but everyone's just avoiding everyone else. Eventually, Jaime's had enough of it and she gets changed to go out, but not before one of the biggest family blow-ups I've seen in a while. Jamie drives over to Luke's house and he tries to tell her that all of this has gotten way out of hand. When she asks if he loved her at all, he tells her that he thought they were just having fun. He tries to let her down somewhat easily, but there's no easy way of getting this point across. Before she leaves, Jamie just wants to know if she was the last girl he got to sleep with before he couldn't do it ever again. He's not entirely sure how to answer, but he tells her that they have to forget each other now. After Luke goes back inside, Jamie drives over to March's party, where she immediately walks up to March, kisses him hard, and tries to take him upstairs. When she says that she's giving him what he wants, Marge can't believe that she said that. Suddenly Emily shows up after getting frisky upstairs, and Jamie admits to lying about who she hooked up with. Jamie doesn't stop there. She also calls Emily a tornado that sucks up anything in a 50-mile radius, and she says that Emily blows enough lacrosse players to cover both of them. This movie took slut-shaming to a whole new level. After hearing all of this, Marge decides that it's time for Jamie to leave. After she attacks him with her harsh words, he stands his ground in making her leave, and she wakes up the next morning to get ready for the funeral. At the same time, Dylan comes up to get away from everything, and he explains that he's just doing what their grandmother told him. It turns out that she told him that he was a homosexual and that he needed to run away and get fixed. Grandma wasn't pulling any punches. In her last minutes, she literally dismantled her family within seconds, and she's not even around to deal with it. Jamie assures Dylan that he'll always have her, and they all head to the funeral. After hearing all of the usual speeches from people being nice at the funeral, it comes time for final speeches, and Jamie musters up enough courage to stand and address everyone. After realizing that she has nothing else to lose, she finally opens up to everyone about the need to forgive people you can't talk to. She definitely ruffles feathers when she breaks the perfect image of her grandmother, when she tells everyone that her grandmother told her the 2 secrets she knows now. Luke tries to talk her down, but Jamie isn't going to stop. Just a heads up, funeral or not, it's probably not a good idea to address a church full of people about your dead grandmother telling you to learn how to give a good __. On top of that, she blows the whistle on her escapades with Luke, punches him in the face, and runs away with Dylan through the cemetery on golf carts. This is amazing. It's like a bad episode of Jackass, including the crashing of the golf cart. When Jamie and Dylan come to, they find themselves in the grave that was prepared for their grandmother. After a crowd gathers, both of them get pulled out, and Jaime's arm is definitely broken. When they get to the doctor, Ned and Shira celebrate a successful funeral, and Jamie gets her arm put in a matching cast with Dylan. When they all go back to the reception, Jamie apologizes for what she said to her father, and they hug it out before going about their normal lives. Later, Shira comes into check on Jamie, and she tells her that Luke's leaving. Jamie asks her if her grandmother did all this on purpose, but Shira chalks it up to just wanting to feel like she's in control. As Jamie remembers her summer and all of the changes that she experienced in this one, she heads back to school. Marge comes to her locker to ask how her summer went, and after a smile from Jamie, the credits are all coming of age movies are a dime a dozen, but this one was a refreshing take on it. Something about its delivery just made it worthwhile. It didn't try to sugarcoat anything, and I can appreciate that.